Ellie's fists clenched around the dumbbells, her knuckles whitening as Richard's voice cut through the gym's hum like a blade. You lifting to impress your girlfriend, Ellie? Or just to prove you're tougher than the rest of us? The words stung, sharp and deliberate, echoing off the mirrors of the upscale Manhattan Fitness Center. At 28, Ellie Harper was no stranger to judgment, but Richard Caldwell, the 60-year-old CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, made it personal every time she stepped into his company's private gym. His taunts were a ritual, as predictable as the sweat dripping down her brow during her deadlifts. Yet, each jab landed heavier than the last, threatening to crack the armor she'd built around her heart. Ellie didn't respond. She never did. Instead, she channeled the hurt into her reps, her muscles burning as she pushed through another set. The gym was her sanctuary, a place to drown out the world's noise, but Richard's presence turned it into a battlefield. He wasn't just her boss. He was the untouchable titan who owned half the real estate in New York City, a man whose wealth and influence made his cruelty feel like a law of nature. Ellie, a junior marketing analyst at his company, was nothing in his eyes, a lesbian with no pedigree, no connections, just grit and a dream to climb the corporate ladder. Across the gym, Sarah Bennett caught Ellie's eye. At 32, Sarah was a senior project manager, poised and polished, with a quiet confidence that made her stand out in boardrooms and weight rooms alike. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her green eyes held a warmth that softened the sterile glow of the gym's fluorescent lights. She'd been Ellie's rock for the past 6 months, ever since they'd started talking during a company retreat. Their connection was instant, a spark that grew into late-night conversations and stolen glances. Sarah was out and proud, but she navigated Richard's world with a grace Ellie envied. When Richard's taunts began, Sarah would shoot Ellie a look, a silent promise that they'd get through this together. "You're wasting your energy, Harper," Richard called out, leaning against a treadmill with a smirk. "No amount of muscle's gonna make you fit in with the big dogs." His words drew a few chuckles from the other executives working out nearby, their loyalty to Richard as predictable as his cruelty. Ellie's jaw tightened, but she kept her focus on the barbell, counting her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Sarah, wiping down a machine nearby, spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "She's outlifting half the room, Richard. Maybe you should try keeping up." The gym fell silent for a split second, the air thick with tension. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he didn't snap back. Sarah had that effect. She could challenge him without crossing the line, a skill Ellie was still learning. As the session ended, Ellie and Sarah lingered by the water fountain, their fingers brushing as they passed a towel. "He's not worth it," Sarah whispered, her voice low and steady. "He's just a sad old man who picks on you because he can." Ellie nodded, but the words didn't erase the ache in her chest. She wanted to believe Sarah, wanted to let the love growing between them be enough to shield her from Richard's venom. But every jab reminded her of the world she was fighting to belong in, a world that didn't always want her. That night, Ellie lay awake in her small Brooklyn apartment, staring at the ceiling. Sarah's texts lit up her phone, offering comfort, but the weight of Richard's words lingered. She wasn't just fighting for a promotion or a paycheck. She was fighting for her place in a world that judged her for who she loved. The gym, the office, the city, it was all a proving ground. And Ellie was determined to prove she was more than Richard's punching bag. The next morning, the office buzzed with its usual chaos, phones ringing, emails pinging, the scent of overpriced coffee in the air. Ellie sat at her desk, her mind half on her latest marketing campaign, half on the gym session looming after work. Richard's taunts were relentless, but she'd learned to anticipate them, to brace herself for the sting. What she didn't anticipate was the email that landed in her inbox just before lunch, marked urgent from Richard's assistant. "Ellie Harper, report to the CEO's office at 2 p.m. sharp." Her stomach dropped. Richard never summoned her directly. Meetings with him were reserved for senior staff, not junior analysts like her. She glanced across the open-plan office at Sarah, who was deep in conversation with a colleague. Sarah caught her eye and mouthed, "You okay?" Ellie forced a nod, but her pulse raced. Had Richard seen her and Sarah together outside work? Was he about to fire her for some made-up reason? The possibilities churned in her mind, each one worse than the last. At 2 p.m., Ellie stood outside Richard's corner office, her palms sweaty. The glass walls offered a view of the Manhattan skyline, a reminder of the power he wielded. She knocked, and his gruff voice called, "Come in." Inside, Richard sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his silver hair gleaming under the sunlight. He didn't look up from his papers. "Harper," he said, his tone clipped, "you're wasting your potential. You've got brains, but you're too busy playing victim to use them. Step up, or you're out." Ellie blinked, stunned. Was this a warning or a challenge? Before she could respond, he waved her out, dismissing her like an afterthought. As she left, her mind reeled. Richard's words weren't just a critique, they were a gauntlet thrown at her feet. She could fold under his pressure, or she could fight harder. By the time she reached the gym that evening, her resolve was steel. Richard could mock her all he wanted, but she'd show him, and everyone else, what she was made of. Sarah was waiting by the lockers, her smile a beacon in the storm. "What happened?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. Ellie recounted the meeting, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. Sarah listened, then pulled her into a quick, fierce hug.
"You've got this," she said.
"And I've got you." That night, as they walked through the city, hands brushing but not quite holding, Ellie felt a flicker of hope. Richard's world was cold and unforgiving, but Sarah's presence was a reminder that love could be a rebellion. And Ellie was ready to fight, for her career, for her dignity, and for the woman who made her heart race. The gym's mirrors reflected Ellie's strained expression as she pushed through another set of squats, Richard's voice a relentless drone in the background. "What's the point, Harper? You'll never be one of us," he said, his tone laced with mockery as he adjusted his tie, pristine even in workout gear. At 28, Ellie had learned to tune him out, but each word chipped away at her focus, her muscles trembling not just from the weight, but from the effort to hold herself together. Sarah, wiping down a nearby bench, shot Ellie a glance that said, "Ignore him." Their relationship had deepened over the past few weeks, stolen moments in coffee shops and quiet walks through Central Park weaving a bond that felt unbreakable. Sarah's strength was a lifeline, but Ellie couldn't shake the fear that Richard's cruelty would taint even that. His power loomed over every aspect of her life, her job, her workouts, her dreams of rising in Caldwell Enterprises. The office was no reprieve. Ellie's marketing campaigns were gaining traction, her ideas sparking interest in team meetings, but Richard never acknowledged her contributions. Instead, he'd single her out in front of colleagues, dropping snide remarks about her lifestyle that left the room in awkward silence. "Focus on work, Harper, not your personal drama," he'd say, as if her identity was a distraction rather than a part of who she was. Ellie's cheeks burned, but she kept her head down, pouring her energy into her projects. One evening, after a particularly brutal gym session, Sarah pulled Ellie aside in the locker room. "You're letting him get to you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He's a bully, Ellie, but he's not your future. You are." Ellie wanted to believe her, but the weight of Richard's influence felt suffocating. Sarah reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "We're stronger than him," she whispered. "Together." That night, they sat on Ellie's couch, sharing takeout and stories of their pasts. Sarah spoke of her conservative upbringing in Ohio, how she'd fought to carve out a life where she could be herself. Ellie shared her own struggles, growing up in a small New Jersey town, hiding who she was until college gave her the courage to come out. Their vulnerabilities laid bare, they found solace in each other, their laughter a defiance against the world's harshness. But the next day brought a new challenge. Richard called Ellie into his office again, this time with a stack of her recent campaign reports. "These are decent," he said, his tone grudging. "But you're still not cutting it. You want a real shot? Prove you can handle pressure." He handed her a high-stakes project, a multi-million-dollar marketing push for a new luxury condo development. It was a chance to shine, but also a test designed to make her fail. Ellie dove into the project with everything she had, working late nights and weekends. Sarah was there through it all, bringing coffee to the office, offering feedback on drafts, and reminding Ellie to breathe. Their relationship was a quiet rebellion against Richard's world, but it wasn't without cost. Rumors began to spread among colleagues, whispers about Ellie and Sarah that reached Richard's ears. His taunts grew sharper, more personal. "You two think you're untouchable?" he sneered one evening in the gym, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ellie's heart pounded, but Sarah's steady gaze kept her grounded. As the project deadline loomed, Ellie's stress reached a breaking point. She was killing it. Her campaign was bold, innovative, and on track to impress the board, but Richard's constant scrutiny made every step feel like a tightrope walk. One night, unable to sleep, she confessed her fears to Sarah. "What if I'm not enough? What if he's right about me?" Sarah cupped Ellie's face, her eyes fierce. "You're more than enough. You're extraordinary. And I love you." The words hit Ellie like a tidal wave.
Love.
It was the first time Sarah had said it, and it changed everything. Suddenly, the gym, the office, Richard's cruelty, they all felt smaller. Ellie kissed Sarah, her heart racing with a mix of fear and joy. They were in this together, and that was worth fighting for. The next morning, Ellie walked into the office with a new fire in her chest. She presented her campaign to the board, her voice steady, her ideas sharp. The room erupted in applause, but Richard's face remained unreadable. Later, in the gym, he cornered her. "Don't get cocky, Harper. One good project doesn't make you a star." But for the first time, Ellie didn't flinch. She met his gaze and said, "I'm just getting started." Ellie's triumph in the boardroom was short-lived. Richard's taunts didn't stop. They evolved, growing subtler but no less cutting. "You think one campaign makes you indispensable?" he said during a gym session, his voice low as he leaned against a weight rack. "You're still the odd one out, Harper." At 28, Ellie was used to his barbs, but they stung deeper now, laced with the threat of her newfound visibility. Her campaign success had put her on the radar, and Richard seemed determined to keep her in her place. Sarah, ever her anchor, noticed the toll it was taking. "He's scared of you," she said one night as they walked through the West Village, the city's pulse a backdrop to their conversation. At 32, Sarah had a knack for seeing through people, and her words carried weight. "You're a threat to his ego, Ellie. Keep shining, and he'll crumble." Ellie wanted to believe her, but the pressure was relentless. Her new project demanded perfection, and Richard's scrutiny was a constant shadow. The gym remained their battleground. Ellie and Sarah trained side by side, their routines a silent act of solidarity. But Richard's presence turned every session into a performance. "You two are quite the pair," he'd say, his smirk implying more than his words. Ellie's stomach churned, but Sarah's hand brushing hers as they passed equipment was a reminder of what they were fighting for. Their love was a quiet revolution, blooming in the cracks of Richard's empire. One evening, after a particularly grueling workout, Ellie overheard Richard on a phone call outside the gym. His voice was sharp, agitated. "I don't care what it costs, make it happen," he snapped before hanging up. Ellie exchanged a glance with Sarah. Something was off. Richard's usual swagger seemed strained, his face pale under the gym's harsh lights. For a moment, Ellie wondered if the untouchable CEO was human after all. Back at the office, Ellie threw herself into her work, determined to prove Richard wrong. Her campaign was gaining traction, with early metrics showing record engagement. Colleagues began to seek her input, and even senior executives nodded approvingly in meetings. But Richard's approval remained elusive. He'd interrupt her presentations with dismissive comments, undermining her in front of the team. "Stick to the basics, Harper," he'd say. "Don't overreach." Sarah, meanwhile, was navigating her own challenges. As a senior project manager, she was overseeing a major deal that could elevate Caldwell Enterprises to new heights. Her confidence and competence made her a target for Richard's subtle jabs, but she handled them with a grace Ellie admired. One night, over dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, Sarah confessed her own fears. "I'm tired of playing his game," she said, her voice soft. "But I stay because I believe in us, and in you." Ellie reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We'll outlast him," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. Their love was a shield, but it couldn't protect them from everything. The next day, Richard called Ellie into his office again. This time, he wasn't alone. The company's legal counsel sat beside him, a stack of documents on the desk. "Harper," Richard began, his tone colder than usual. "Your campaign's doing well, but don't think it gives you a free pass. I'm watching you." He slid a contract across the desk, a non-disclosure agreement tied to her project. "Sign it, or you're done." Ellie's heart raced. The terms were vague, the implications unclear. Was this another trap? She signed, her hand steady, but her mind racing. That night, Sarah helped her dissect the contract over coffee in Ellie's apartment. "He's testing your loyalty," Sarah said, her brow furrowed. "But there's something bigger going on. He's been erratic lately. Meetings canceled, calls ignored." Ellie nodded, recalling Richard's strained phone call. The man who'd built an empire was slipping, and Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that his unraveling would change everything. In the gym the next evening, Richard's taunts were quieter, almost distracted. "You're still here, Harper?" he muttered, his eyes distant. Ellie didn't respond, but as she lifted, she felt a shift. For the first time, Richard's words didn't cut as deep. She was stronger, not just in muscle, but in spirit. And with Sarah by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The air in the gym felt heavier than usual, Richard's presence a storm cloud despite his uncharacteristic silence. Ellie, at 28, noticed the change. His taunts had dwindled, replaced by a distracted scowl as he paced near the treadmills. His silver hair was disheveled, his suit jacket slung carelessly over a bench. For the first time, the untouchable CEO seemed vulnerable, and Ellie couldn't ignore the unease creeping into her chest. Sarah, 32, caught her gaze across the gym, her green eyes questioning. They'd grown closer, their love a quiet strength against Richard's relentless pressure. But the shift in his behavior unnerved them both. "Something's wrong," Sarah whispered as they stretched post-workout. "He's not himself." Ellie nodded, her mind flashing to the cryptic contract she'd signed. Was Richard planning something bigger than either of them could anticipate? At the office, Ellie's campaign was a runaway success, earning praise from clients and the board. Her confidence grew, but so did the stakes. Richard's scrutiny intensified, his feedback laced with a strange urgency. "Don't screw this up, Harper," he snapped during a meeting, his voice hoarse. Colleagues exchanged glances. Richard's temper was legendary, but this felt different, almost desperate. Outside work, Ellie and Sarah carved out moments of joy. They spent a weekend in the Catskills, hiking trails and laughing under starlit skies. "This is what matters," Sarah said, her hand warm in Ellie's as they sat by a campfire. "Not Richard, not the company, just us." Ellie kissed her, the weight of the world lifting for a moment. But back in the city, reality crashed in. One morning, the office was abuzz with rumors. Richard had missed a major investor meeting, an unheard-of lapse for a man who thrived on control. Ellie overheard whispers in the break room, health concerns, financial troubles, even talk of a buyout. She tried to focus on her work, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Sarah, swamped with her own project, was equally on edge. "If something's happening, we need to be ready," she told Ellie over lunch. "This could be our chance, or our downfall." That evening, the gym was nearly empty, save for Ellie, Sarah, and Richard. His workout was sluggish, his face pale as he gripped a kettlebell. You two still think you can outshine me? He muttered, but his voice lacked its usual venom. Ellie ignored him, focusing on her reps, but Sarah's hand on her arm stopped her. Look at him, Sarah whispered. Richard's hands trembled, his breath uneven. For a moment, Ellie felt a pang of pity, then remembered every cruel word he'd thrown at her. The next day, everything changed. Ellie arrived at the office to find it in chaos. Richard's assistant, pale and shaken, pulled her aside. He's gone, she whispered. Richard had a heart attack last night. He didn't make it. Ellie's world tilted. The man who'd tormented her, who'd shaped her every ambition and fear, was dead. She felt a strange mix of relief and guilt, her mind racing with questions. Sarah found her in the break room, her face mirroring Ellie's shock. What does this mean for us? Ellie asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah squeezed her hand. I don't know, but we'll face it together. The office was a whirlwind of speculation. Would the company fold? Who would take over? Ellie tried to focus on her work, but the weight of Richard's absence was overwhelming. Days later, Ellie was called to a meeting with the company's board. She expected a routine update, but the room fell silent as the head of legal handed her a sealed envelope. This is Richard's will, he said. He named you as his successor. Ellie's breath caught. The room spun as she opened the document, her name staring back at her in black ink. Richard Caldwell, the man who'd mocked her for being herself, had left her his empire. Ellie's hands trembled as she clutched the will, the words blurring before her eyes. At 28, she was no longer just a junior analyst. She was the designated CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, an empire built on Richard's ruthlessness. The boardroom was silent, a dozen pairs of eyes fixed on her, some skeptical, others curious. Ellie's mind raced. Why her? The man who'd mocked her identity, who'd belittled her every step, had chosen her to lead. It felt like a final taunt, a cruel twist of fate. Sarah stood outside the boardroom, waiting. When Ellie emerged, her face pale, Sarah's arms were around her in an instant. What happened? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Ellie handed her the will, unable to speak. Sarah's eyes widened as she read, then softened with pride. You can do this, she said, her hand cupping Ellie's cheek. He saw something in you, even if he never admitted it. But the weight of the decision was crushing. Ellie had fought for respect, not power. The company was a behemoth, real estate, investments, global contracts, and she was untested, unproven in the eyes of those who'd watched Richard rule with an iron fist. The board gave her a week to decide whether to accept the role, their faces betraying doubts about her ability to lead. That night, Ellie and Sarah sat on the fire escape of Ellie's apartment, the city's lights sprawling below. I don't know if I'm ready, Ellie admitted, her voice breaking. He hated me, Sarah. Why would he do this? Sarah took her hand, her touch grounding. Maybe he didn't hate you. Maybe he saw the strength you've been showing all along. Ellie wanted to believe her, but the memory of Richard's taunts, every jab about her identity, made trust impossible. The next day, the office was a minefield. Colleagues whispered, some congratulating Ellie, others eyeing her with resentment. Senior executives, loyal to Richard's old guard, questioned her qualifications. You're too young, one said bluntly during a meeting. This company needs experience, not idealism. Ellie's resolve wavered, but Sarah's encouragement kept her steady. They're testing you, Sarah said over coffee. Show them you're more than they think. Ellie dove into learning the company's operations, poring over financial reports and meeting with department heads. Her marketing background gave her an edge, but the scale of the role was daunting. She leaned on Sarah, who navigated the corporate politics with her, offering insights from her own experience. Their late nights in the office blurred into moments of intimacy, shared glances, quiet laughter, a kiss stolen in an empty conference room. Their love was a refuge, but the pressure was unrelenting. Rumors began to surface about Richard's final days. A colleague mentioned he'd been revising his will for weeks, his health declining rapidly. Another claimed he'd spoken of Ellie in private, calling her the only one with guts. The revelations shook Ellie. Had Richard's cruelty been a twisted way of pushing her? She couldn't reconcile the man who'd mocked her with the one who'd entrusted her with his legacy. By the end of the week, Ellie faced the board again. Her heart pounded, but she stood tall, her voice clear. "I accept the role," she said. "Not because Richard chose me, but because I believe in what this company can be." The room was silent. Then the head of the board nodded. "You've got 1 month to prove yourself," he said. "Don't let us down." As Ellie left the boardroom, Sarah was waiting, her smile a beacon. "You're incredible," she whispered, pulling Ellie into a hug. For the first time, Ellie felt the weight of possibility, not just to lead, but to redefine what leadership meant. With Sarah by her side, she was ready to face the challenge, even if the ghost of Richard's cruelty lingered. Ellie stood at the head of the boardroom table, her palms sweaty as she faced Caldwell Enterprises' top executives. At 28, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, and the weight of their scrutiny was palpable. "We're pivoting," she declared, her voice steady despite the nerves. "This company's been about profit over people for too long. It's time for change." The room bristled. Richard's legacy was profit-driven, and Ellie's vision of inclusivity and community investment was a radical departure. Sarah, now her closest advisor, sat in on the meeting, her presence a quiet strength. At 32, she'd taken on a new role, helping Ellie navigate the corporate labyrinth. Their relationship, once whispered about in hallways, was now an open secret, and Ellie refused to hide it. "If we're going to lead, we lead authentically," she told Sarah the night before, their hands intertwined as they planned the company's future. The first weeks were brutal. Ellie faced pushback from executives loyal to Richard's old ways, their resistance cloaked in polite skepticism. "You're moving too fast," one said, his tone patronizing. "Richard built this company on discipline, not dreams." Ellie held her ground, presenting data from her marketing campaigns to show how community-focused initiatives could boost profits and loyalty. Slowly, a few board members began to listen. Outside the office, Ellie and Sarah faced their own challenges. The media had caught wind of Ellie's appointment, and tabloids ran stories about the lesbian CEO shaking up Manhattan. Some celebrated her rise, others echoed Richard's cruelty, questioning her legitimacy. Ellie tried to ignore the noise, but it cut deep. Sarah was her anchor, reminding her of their shared strength. "They don't get to define us," Sarah said one night, her arms around Ellie as they watched the city from a rooftop bar. Ellie's first major move as CEO was a diversity initiative, mandating training and hiring practices to make Caldwell Enterprises a place where everyone could thrive. The announcement sparked backlash from some employees, but others, especially younger staff, rallied behind her. Ellie leaned on Sarah's expertise, using her project management skills to roll out the changes smoothly. Their collaboration was seamless, their love fueling their ambition. But Richard's shadow lingered. Ellie found a letter in his old office, tucked in a drawer. It was addressed to her, written in his sharp, angular handwriting. "You were never weak, Harper," it read. "I pushed you to prove it. Don't fail me." Ellie's throat tightened. Was this his twisted way of mentoring her? She showed the letter to Sarah, who read it in silence. "He saw your strength," Sarah said finally. "But this company's yours now. Make it better than he ever could." Ellie took the words to heart, launching a community outreach program tied to her original marketing campaign. The initiative funded affordable housing, a direct challenge to Richard's legacy of luxury developments. The move earned praise from clients and the public, but it also drew threats from investors who preferred the old ways. One night, Ellie received an anonymous email, "Step down, or you'll regret it." Her heart raced, but she showed it to Sarah, who insisted on hiring security. As the weeks passed, Ellie grew into her role, her confidence bolstered by small victories. She and Sarah began to dream bigger, not just for the company, but for their future. Over dinner one night, Sarah proposed they move in together, a step toward building a life beyond the office. Ellie said yes without hesitation, her heart full despite the chaos. By the end of her first month, Ellie faced the board again. Her initiatives were showing results, profits were steady, and employee morale was up. The board extended her tenure, but the real victory was in the eyes of her team, who began to see her not as Richard's successor, but as a leader in her own right. With Sarah by her side, Ellie knew the fight was far from over, but she was ready. Ellie stood on the rooftop of Caldwell Enterprises' flagship building, the Manhattan skyline glittering below. At 28, she'd transformed the company in ways Richard never could, her vision of inclusivity and community taking root. But the journey had been a gauntlet, testing her resilience and her love with Sarah, who stood beside her now, her hand warm in Ellie's. At 32, Sarah was more than a partner. She was Ellie's co-conspirator, her strength in every battle. The past months had been a whirlwind. Ellie's diversity initiatives had reshaped the company's culture, earning loyalty from employees and clients alike. Her affordable housing program was a hit, with communities praising Caldwell Enterprises for the first time in years. But the threats hadn't stopped. Anonymous messages, hostile investors, even a break-in at her office. Ellie refused to back down, bolstered by Sarah's unwavering support. "We're rewriting the rules," Sarah said one night, her eyes fierce. "And they can't stop us." The board, initially skeptical, began to see Ellie's vision as the future. Profits climbed, driven by her innovative campaigns and a new wave of diverse talent. But the personal cost was high. Ellie and Sarah faced public scrutiny, their relationship dissected by media and colleagues. Yet they stood tall, their love a defiant act against a world that still judged them. At a company gala, Ellie introduced Sarah as her partner, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. The applause was tentative at first, then thunderous, a turning point. One evening, Ellie found another of Richard's letters, hidden in a file. "You are my greatest risk," it read. "Prove me right." The words shook her. Richard's cruelty had been a test, his way of forging her strength. She'd hated him, but she'd also surpassed him, building a legacy that honored her truth. She shared the letter with Sarah, who smiled softly. "You already have," she said, kissing Ellie's forehead. The final challenge came at a board meeting, where a faction of investors demanded Ellie step down, citing her controversial leadership. Ellie faced them head-on, presenting data on the company's growth and testimonials from employees whose lives had changed under her tenure. "This isn't Richard's company anymore," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's ours." Sarah, in the back, beamed with pride. The board voted in Ellie's favor, cementing her role. As the year ended, Ellie and Sarah moved into a new apartment, a symbol of their shared future. The threats had quieted, the company was thriving, and Ellie's vision was no longer a dream, but a reality. They stood together on their balcony, the city alive below. "We did it," Ellie whispered, her heart full. Sarah squeezed her hand. "No, you did it. And I'll always be here." Ellie's journey had begun in a gym, under Richard's cruel gaze, but it ended with her reshaping an empire. She'd faced mockery, doubt, and danger, but she'd also found love, strength, and purpose. The company wasn't just a business. It was a testament to what she and Sarah could build together, a legacy of courage and compassion that would outlast them both.